Today I'm going to show you how to create these three bubbled textures. The first two are realistic, the third one is more abstract. I have timestamps so you can skip around, but you're going to need to build the first pattern as you use that and then adjust it to make the second and third textures. This is what the average node group is going to look like. Hit X and click here to delete this cube. Hit Shift A, you can bring in a plane. It's going to be what our first texture is on. I'm going to change the whole area to my shader editor, the whole middle area, and just put that material that was on our cube onto our plane. Hit N to get rid of that shelf on the right. Let's change the top right to the 3D viewport. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here so we can see what's going on better. Zoom in with the mouse wheel and hold down Z, move the mouse up, and you'll be in rendered mode. I want to create a quick backdrop, so I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate this plane and hit Z, so we just move it down along the Z axis a little bit. Size it up by a factor of 5 by hitting S and then 5. And then I'm going to tab into edit mode and hit 2 to go into edge select. I'm just going to make sure the widget looks like this here. So this is like the front here, and this is the back here that I've got selected. I'm going to hit E and then Z to extrude straight upwards and just kind of eyeball it. You know, something like this looks great. Select this edge right here and hit Control B, and that allows us to bevel it. We can move it up and down like this here and use the mouse wheel to add sections. I'm going to add about 7 or 8 sections, just like this here. Tab back out into object mode and bring up this context menu with W or right click and then hit Shade Smooth. So right now these are the same material. I'm just going to click on this plane here and hit this button right here. This adds a new material but keeps your current setup. So now these are two different materials. And I'm going to choose this one here. Just type in bubbles. We're going to need to set up displacement as well. So we need to change from EV to cycles. Go ahead and do that. And we need to change to experimental as well because we're going to be using some adaptive subdivision. And if you have a GPU, go ahead and select that. It'll be faster. I know mine certainly is. And then go ahead and go down to the material properties and scroll down. And under where it says settings, you just need to change the displacement option from bump only to one of these two, displacement only or displacement and bump. I'm going to choose displacement and bump. Then come to the modifiers panel and let's add a subdivision surface modifier. Go ahead and click adaptive subdivision and simple. If you don't have this adaptive subdivision, you likely didn't set up experimental here. So just make sure that's set up if this option isn't available. And we'll just leave this as is for now. I'm also going to bring in some HDRI lighting. So I'm going to click on this light and just delete that and go to my world properties, and on this yellow circle just click here where it says color and click on environment texture. Click open and you just need to find where you've got some HDRIs. I've got some free ones I got from HDRI Haven, and I'm going to use Sunset in the Quarry 2K. So just go ahead and load that in, and you can click it off if you want by coming down here, go into Ray Visibility and unclicking Camera. And that allows it to continue lighting your scene, but you just can't see it in the background. We're all set up and we're finally ready to start our texture. Hit Shift A and you can bring in a Voronoi texture. Just place it here, and we're just going to come out of the distance. To get that viewer, I just hit Control Shift left click. That's a Node Wrangler shortcut. And while this is highlighted, hit Control T. It's another shortcut. Make sure this is coming out of Object. This mapping node isn't too important, but it's nice to have if you want to make any adjustments. Hit Shift A and bring in a displacement node. Just place that right here. Let's move this principled BSDF out of the way for a second. And I'm going to plug this into the height. It just gets plugged into the normal as a default. That's not where you want it. Then place displacement. Just run it into the displacement on the material output. We can see it's displacing our mesh there. It's not really doing what we want. First of all, let's set this mid-level at 0, and we're going to turn the displacement way down. Let's turn it down to 0.2. And we can see what it's doing. It's kind of creating the opposite shape that we want. We want there to be bubbles up top. So first of all, let's just invert this. We could use an invert node. I'm going to use a color ramp because I just like having the option to make an adjustment there. It obviously is more computer intensive. So if you're having trouble running this, just use an invert node. But I'm just going to set up a color ramp and just flip it around. And now we have something a little bit closer to bubbles already. By the way, with the adaptive subdivision, if you zoom out and then zoom in, sometimes it can be a little bit low detail. So if you want to refresh that detail, just tab in and out of edit mode and it should work. So these shapes don't really look like bubbles, they're kind of a constant slope here, and then they've got a point, whereas I want kind of more of a, rounder shape there. So I'm just going to reinterpolate this with an RGB curves node. And I'm going to place it right between the Voronoi and the color ramp. You could also place it after the color ramp, but I don't know. This is just how I had it set up. We're basically going to make the shape of the bubble upside down. So just kind of see what I'm doing here. This is what we're going to do here. And what we can do at this point is we can make this, a sharper point by coming to this chevron here and just changing it to a vector handle. Auto handle is what it was before. Vector handle is going to be a sudden point there. And you just want to kind of adjust the bubble till you like what you see. You can set up a whole bunch of points here. You can make this a steeper slope. I found a lot of reference pictures showed it a shallower slope, so I'm going to make it something more like this here. I also find it helpful to add a math node usually between the Voronoi and the RGB curves, and just set it to multiply. We'll just set this to 1. You can see as I move this, up or down, you can see the effect it has. If I move it up, we get really sparse areas there. If we go too high, it changes the shape altogether. This is because basically this is now making the range, instead of from 0 to 1, it's from 0 to 2.7. And so what that does to this interpolation is it means that this is only going to cover a very small part of this range, and the rest of this is kind of unmapped. So yeah, it's just kind of helpful to, well, I'm going to go back to the displacement actually. It's just kind of helpful to have a controller here. I'm going to set this back to 1, and I find right before the displacement. I'm going to place it right here as well. You can see right here, it's just kind of a similar effect to the displacement, but it's just nice to have something that just connects to this stream. In case you wanted to make another one and add it to this, then you can have 2 controllers, one for the total displacement and one for the displacement that's just on this line of nodes. So I'm going to set this at 1, and we'll continue from there. Credit where credit's due. This next part comes from watching a default cube video about using the layer weight and just kind of making an interesting texture that can be used for bubbles. I probably would have set it up the same way, but I did make this after watching his video, so thanks for making that video there, default cube. I'm going to bring in a noise texture, just place it right here. That's going to be coming out of object as well. I'm going to change the scale to 20. I'm going to bring in a layer weight, place it right here, and we're going to come out of facing, and I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it right here, and hit Control-Shift-D so we create a second one as well. This top color ramp, I'm going to set the black to 0.53, and the white is going to be at 0.8. So we can see this effect. We move around, it changes on us, which is pretty cool. This second color ramp, let's set this to HSV and then far. And we're going to set this black to, I've got a hex code here. We can just type in, it's going to be 662C16. That's kind of this orangey red color. We can see if we light this up here, it's basically a gradient from that color to white, taking the furthest distance that it can. Let's bring in a mix RGB, place it right here so that this color ramp is going into color 1. Then let's run this color from the noise texture into color 2. We can kind of see what it's doing. It's mixing that gradient with the noise texture, using these colors, kind of creating this interesting color pattern here. We want to mix that with this right here. So I'm going to use that shortcut where you hold Control and then Shift and right click and drag from this mix RGB to the color ramp. And it forms this other mix RGB right here, just really quick. We're going to plug that into the factor, and this mix into color 1. And then color 2 is going to be white. Let's now plug this color into the base color on this principled BSDF. We can look here. Let's turn the transmission up to 1, and we're going to bring the roughness down to 0. I'm going to quickly set up the camera by centering on this by hitting the period on the bottom right and then 1, and then hitting 8 a couple times, and then hitting Control Alt and number pad 0. That makes the current view my camera view. I'm going to select my camera, hit GZZ to zoom out a little bit, and then RXX to rotate the camera a little bit, and then GZ to move it down a little bit. I'm going to make a few adjustments just to make it the same as my original render. First, I'm going to change this Voronoi to 10, so the bubbles are a little smaller. And let's just adjust this multiply right here, right before the displacement. We'll change this to 0.4, and that's just going to be a little bit better. And then finally, this noise texture over here, one thing I neglected to do is add some distortion, which really helps that swirl effect with the different colors in here. So there we go. I'm going to hide this texture for now. I'm just going to move it to a new collection. I'm just going to call this finished. Hit OK. And I guess I have to hide that collection as well. So let's go to the outliner. I'll just unclick this here. Go back to the 3D viewport. Let's bring in a cube this time. And while this is selected, hit Control 4. We're going to apply a subdivision surface modifier. So let's check that out. We can hit Control A while hovering over that. And then let's bring in a cast modifier because this isn't quite a perfect sphere yet. Let's change the factor to 1. And that's a perfect sphere. Hit Control A. And finally, we'll bring in one more subdivision surface modifier. And this is going to be an adaptive subdivision surface modifier. So there we go. We're all set up for displacement for this second texture here. Zoom out a little bit with that camera too. Looks like it's clipping through my underside there as well. So I'm just going to move my background a tiny bit down. There we go. That's good. Also, don't forget to set up smooth shading. W or right click brings up this context menu. Hit Shade Smooth. I could set up this texture from scratch, but I'd rather just use these bubbles that I've already got. We're just going to build off of it. So I'm just going to click this right here, add a new material. That keeps our existing setup, but we can just change it around. So let's just change some stuff here. This noise texture, we're going to change this to 5, and everything else will leave the same. I find when the bubbles are a little small, like this around a cube, or in this case, a cube that's been turned into a sphere, it's a little disorienting. So I'm going to turn the scale down to 1 so it's a larger pattern size. And then I'm going to make some adjustments here. I'm going to change the multiply to 1. And let's bump this scale up to something like 0.5. That looks pretty good. We can keep going higher if we want more exaggerated bubble shapes there. But this is looking pretty good here. I'm also going to come up to the principled BSDF. I'm going to change this roughness from 0 to 0.1. I just like the look of that slightly better. Doesn't really change it too much, but there is the second bubble pattern. This texture is finished, so I'm going to move this to the finished collection. Let's bring in another cube. Let's do the same setup as last time. Control 4, and we'll go to the modifiers panel. Control A to apply that modifier. Bring in a cast modifier, set the factor to 1, and hit Control A again. Bring in a subdivision surface and click Adaptive Subdivision. Let's decide which one we're going to start with. Let's start with bubbles. I think that'll be a little easier. And let's click here to make a new material. I'm going to modify the shapes of these slightly. So we can click and drag one of these points, but we can also click, then shift click, and then shift click again and drag multiple points. It takes a little bit getting used to, but I'm going to move these down a little bit here and just make this kind of a slightly more round shape, just so they stick all the way out there. Then come over to the multiply and change this to 1. Then let's come up here. Let's get rid of one of these mix RGBs and grab the other one off as well. We're going to set up something here where we just have a bit of distortion. So we'll change the settings on this noise texture to just the default settings. So 5, 2, 0.5, and 0. And I'm going to plug color into color 1 on this mix RGB, and then object from the texture coordinate into color 2. Then I'm going to set this mix at 0.7. So if you look at what this is doing, it's just a slight amount of distortion here. I'm going to grab this color ramp off of here as well, because we're going to plug this, I guess not quite in yet. First of all, we're going to bring in a separate XYZ, plug it in right here, and out of the X, we're going to plug this color ramp, just like this. We also need to change this so it's coming out of generated. So I just held down shift and right click and drag. Right-clicked and dragged to create a node reroute point, and then just change it from object to generated here. And that makes it so that the gradient starts all the way from one end and goes to the other end there. We're also going to adjust these flags here. Just bring them in a little bit. We're going to adjust this first one to 0.23, and the second one is going to be 0.83. Then come up to this color ramp here, this black. We're going to move this down to 0.24. And this white, we're just going to bring up to the very top to 1. I'm going to grab this principled BSDF here, just unplug it, and plug it into this color ramp. And then let's duplicate it and won't plug it there. Let's mix them together with Control Shift, right click and drag between the two of them. And I'll just swap those so it's a little easier to look at. This color ramp is going to go into the top there. And yeah, looks pretty good. Let's just set up this. This first one is going to have roughness of 1 and a transmission of 0. And this one's going to be roughness of 0, transmission of 1. That looks good. Let's connect this to the surface on the material output. It's looking pretty good. The last thing we need to do is just adjust this Voronoi. Let's change it to 4D. Let's change the scale to 5, so it's a little bit bigger there. And then let's change the W value to 0.9. I'm just going to play with these values here. And I'm just going to move them over a little bit, like this, just to get some more coverage there. Let's also come up to these principled BSDFs. I don't know when I turn this on, the transmission roughness to 1. That should be at 0. And then let's come over to the displacement. Let's change this to 0.4. Gives it more of a round shape there. And maybe let's adjust this RGB curves actually slightly now that we've got this here too. Something like that. Looks pretty good. And once again, we're kind of running into this backdrop, so I'm just going to move this slightly down. And let's move the camera slightly back with GZZ to zoom out. And there we go. We've got texture 3. Before I render this out, I'm just going to change my HDRI rotation. To do that, I'm going to come up to the top left and go to World. I've got my HDRI visible now. And if I click on this and hit Control T, it brings up the texture coordinate and mapping node. Then I'm going to change the Z rotation to 160 degrees. There we go. Now the light is primarily coming from the left. So that's it for today. Hope you can see what I was doing and how you might change it around, make your own unique creation. If you are confused about anything though, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments. I'll see what I can do to clear up that confusion. Thanks a lot for watching.